On their way to their final adventure before becoming adults, these 27 energetic teens were brimming with life. Then they disappeared completely. Complete quiet. No one is speaking. The 1999 graduating class's tale remained a chilling urban legend, passed down through generations as a cautionary tale, spoken around campfires for a full 22 years. The situation changed when a hiker found a rusting school bus in the woods, engulfed in moss and containing moldy yearbooks and other items. A surprise for which nobody had budgeted. The Rogue River in Siskiyou National Forest, Oregon, on June 3, 2021. A seasoned hiker, deviating from his usual route, spots an unusual yellow object peeking out from behind some trees. He approaches, expecting to see weathered machinery or a ranger post, but instead finds the wreckage of a school bus, engulfed in vegetation. I can hardly make out the number on the side. Time appears to have come to a standstill inside. The room was filled with ancient, dusty backpacks that were still fastened to the seats, old, faded Polaroids, a bent tape player, and mold-stained pages from a yearbook. However, in the far rear seat, there was an apparent human jawbone hidden beneath a heap of garments. Upon arrival, investigators linked the bus to a haunting cold case in Oregon history: the 1999 graduation trip disappearance of the senior class of Forest Grove High School. Their investigation, however, revealed an increasingly inconceivable scenario. Almost every missing student's belongings were found inside the bus, but no trail cameras had captured its entrance. There was no road in the area and no record of the bus ever being rented. There were some undamaged items among the rearranged ones, which seemed more like part of a ritual or message. The events that transpired on the bus were not accidental. What the woodland concealed for over 20 years was far from a tragedy. It was intended that no one should discover the secret. Seniors on the cusp of independence sent a jolt of electric excitement through Forest Grove High School's corridors. As students hurriedly cranked down the days, laughter resounded through the halls, and teachers bore the tired faces of those who were keeping track. The members of the class of 1999 were eagerly anticipating graduation in May of that year. There were 26 students that stood out among the sea of navy caps and gowns getting ready for the big day. It wasn't that they were remarkable. It was just that they were near. Over the years, this close-knit group has weathered the storms of shared classrooms, broken hearts, inside jokes, and Friday night games. As she confidently made her way down the corridor, Lacey Monroe held a folder close to her heart. She achieved her parents' wildest dreams: valedictorian, president of the student council, and a guaranteed spot at an elite university. Mayor Thomas Monroe, her father, made sure to highlight her accomplishments whenever he spoke on behalf of the city. Lacey may have seemed confident, but those who knew her well could see the strain on her mental health. The hours spent studying at night, the panic episodes concealed in the privacy of the restroom. Jared Fields, not long following, snuck into the audiovisual room, camera in hand, and began narrating his own high school mockumentary. Among his classmates, Jared stood out. His eyes had a sharpness that few noticed, yet he was a clown, bold, unrelenting, and sometimes annoying. He intended to incorporate the camping excursion into his capstone project, a time capsule commemorating their final week of being together. Going to be my Blair, which, but funnier, he made fun of. Nearly every student in his class was dwarfed by Tyrese Hall. I have proudly worn my full-ride football scholarship to Oregon State in lieu of shoulder pads for quite some time. Everyone, including Tyrese's coaches, classmates, and mother, had high expectations for him. A rising sense of dread, however, accompanied each scholarship offer. Could things go wrong? The happiest times of his life may have passed him by. Later on, there was Emily Tran, a girl whose very presence was frequently announced simply by the gentle scrubbing of pencil against paper. She carried her sketchbook at all times. Inside were drawings of her friends, who had no idea their likenesses had been captured in dream sceneries set in a forest. When she did speak, it was always in response to someone else, and her silence lingered. Even though Emily didn't really belong there, they all seemed to trust her. Friday afternoon's last bell sounded amidst a flurry of joy around the school. Someone in the car turned up Green Day's Good Riddance to full blast. As teachers distributed final permission slips, discussions about the Rogue River Wilderness trip took center stage. Today, June 5th, 1999. The original plan called for a party. The senior class of Forest Grove High School had spent months preparing for their commencement trip. This journey represented their escape from the shackles of small-town life after years of final exams, college acceptance letters, and monotony. An isolated camping in the heart of the Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest in Oregon was the intended goal. Beautiful, remote, and free of parents, curfews, and regulations. On that particular Saturday morning, they boarded a yellow school bus that was being driven by Mr. Harold Griggs, who had filled in for the regular driver the night before due to illness. The takeoff was upbeat. With their sleeping bags and snack packs packed inside their backpacks, students waved to their families. Just before boarding, a handful of parents managed to catch some blurry camera footage, which included laughter, applause, and a group shot. They would be completely forgotten after that. A voicemail arrived at 6:41 p.m. that night for one of the parents, Mrs. Elsie McClure. It came from Rachel, her daughter. There was a hush when someone shouted, "Turn that off." After that, there was a long period of quiet. Just static. No farewell, no one to call. At first, it was thought that the bus had become delayed when it failed to check in at the campground that night. The sky was thick with fog. There were steep drops on either side of the forest's small, unpaved roads. The parents tried calling, but nobody picked up. Panic ensued by Sunday morning. Rescue groups were quickly mobilized. The area was surveyed by helicopters. There were no tire traces, cell phone pings, or broken branches to follow, so the dogs' tracking efforts were fruitless. No yellow school bus had shown up, according to the campground host. Without a trace, the bus and its occupants had disappeared. The search teams expanded on day 3. A week down the road, a fisherman from the area noticed something out of the ordinary close to a river bend. 15 miles from the main road, an abandoned disposable camera partially submerged in muck. The outside was broken and stained with water. The detectives discovered nothing inside when they opened it. There was no longer any internal film. Another enigma emerged 10 days later. The parents of one of the missing children, Trevor Callahan, Mr. and Mrs. Callahan, got a letter in the mail. "We made it. Please stop looking." The note first offered hope, but handwriting specialists evaluated it and found no return address or postmark, just 5 words scribbled in unsteady handwriting. Uneven pressure and crooked letter curves plagued the text. Almost, but not quite, did it resemble Trevor's writing. Conclusion: probably fake, maybe traceable. However, speculation began with the note. The children's supposed abduction was allegedly faked. Some people murmured something about eerie forest rituals or cults. There was no sign of the bus, the driver, or the 27 kids. Some even thought they were hiding. The facts, however, have not changed. Nobody ever testified as a witness. Nothing was ever discovered. The investigation was subtly ended after 2 months with the designation of an unresolved missing persons incident. However, the parents persisted in their search. Some of them would go on annual treks through the woods. Pics of the missing person were shared on message boards by others. Additionally, Robert Vasquez, a parent, meticulously recorded each theory, peculiar suggestion, and restless night in a journal. A statement he made in the past went something like this: "I don't think they drove off the road. I don't think it was an accident. I think something took them, something that didn't want them found." He never clarified his meaning, and nobody ever disproved his claims. A quarter of a century had elapsed. A specter remained in the midst of the new faces, laughter, and memories that filled Forest Grove High School's halls. Near the entryway, there was a bronze plaque with the names of 27 students carved beneath the words, "Gone, but never forgotten." Class of 1999 there was a memorial service every June at the school. The class would light 27 candles. Not being able to handle the burden of unresolved inquiries, several had left early. Some lingered, their spirits weighed down by the memories of a youth they had previously educated. Neither the clock nor the distance had sped up over town. Nothing had happened in bedrooms that had formerly been cluttered with adolescent posters, textbooks, and the aroma of perfume. Every bed was made in the same manner. On the bookcases, dance trophies and unfinished diaries waited as if their rightful owners had merely stepped out and might be back any second. Hope was like oxygen to some parents. Some people fell into a subtle form of mourning that didn't make a sound. It quietly subsided. Matthew Delaney's father, Mr. Delaney, was the class valedictorian, and he spent several days at the library going over his son's final essay. The garden that Nina had planted a few weeks prior to the trip was irrigated by Mrs. Santos, whose daughter had played varsity soccer. A single flower evaded her fingertips. Irene, Lacey's mother, clung on more tightly than anyone else. Although most people let hope die with the years, Irene remained hopeful. She flat out refused to sign any paperwork certifying her death or even mark her grave. Every morning, she would make her bed, leave her voicemail greeting unaltered, and place Lacey's toothbrush in the holder. "She's still here," Irene would assure him. According to the neighbors, it was an act of denial. "I don't know where she is, but she's out there. I feel it in her family." It was referred to as grief. Nearing midday on June 3rd, 2021, an off-duty firefighter from Medford, Oregon, named Travis Milner, sets off on a hiking adventure across the seldom-explored Rogue River, Siskiyou National Forest. He simply desires peace and quiet, without any specific demands. However, after several hours of navigating dense underbrush well beyond the designated trails, he spots something peculiar. A glimmer of yellow, nearly completely obscured by vegetation and decomposition. After he prunes the overgrown ferns and vines, the outline starts to take shape. There were shattered metal panes of glass and flattened rubber tires. A school bus, its structure bent and covered by years of vegetation, rusty and shattered. You can hardly make out the number 57 on the side, because it is so little and almost completely gone. Weather and time have expanded the door, making it jam. With a cough, he pushes it open, releasing stale air. Inside is a mausoleum. There is mildew and dust on every surface. On the floor, among rotting but still identifiable items, are school bags, Letterman jackets, and two musty graduation hats. Ivy grows through broken windows, and seats are torn. A coat bearing the insignia of Forest Grove High School droops precariously over the back of a seat, resting amidst the rubble of fallen luggage racks. He sees the bones, not just one set, but multiple. Although some have rotted to a skeleton, others remain mostly whole. His eyes adjust to the new reality for a while. As per later confirmation, there are no fewer than 17 sets of human remains. Without delay, he dials 911. The location is quickly surrounded by police officers. At the site, anthropologists, forensic teams, and investigators congregate. As if by magic, the 1999 cold case is now raging again. The news media swoops in. After 22 years of hoping and sorrow, families are now made to go through it all again. First, the agents start making a list of everything that was on board the bus. The majority of the things have been weathered, and some have been completely destroyed. However, amidst the moldy, cracked rucksack that was stuffed behind the driver's seat, they stumble upon an intriguing find, a wet manila folder that remains unbroken. Among the contents are charcoal and pencil drawings that Emily Thompson, a senior who went missing, signed in the lower corners. There is no trace of her among the debris. The drawings are unsettling and eerie. One depicts a group of people encircling a fire in a clearing in the forest. Another depicts expressionless, emotionless features concealed under hastily painted masks. Blood dripping from tree branches forms a circle on the woodland floor in another, darker, more agitated drawing. In the background, there are symbols that do not correspond to any language that is currently recognized. Looks like a few pages are ripped or torn. The final drawing in the folder is a diary entry depicting a bus that resembles the school bus, but is actually quite different. Tall, anonymous figures encircle it. A mask is displayed in the front glass, just behind the wheel. The use of dental records and DNA helps investigators identify the remains. A total of 28 individuals have gone missing. 16 were pupils and 2 were faculty. There are 17 remains that have been located, but 9 students and both instructors, Mr. Carl Muse, the advanced placement history teacher, and Ms. Janine Crawford, the chaperone, are still missing. All lingering theories that the class simply disappeared or killed in a collision are shattered by the revelation. There is no way for a bus of that size to get to the bus deep in the forest unnoticed because the path is too narrow. Tire tracks and no roads in the area. It wasn't a crash. It was deliberately hidden there. What gives with just 17? Who were the other people? For what reason was Emily, a shy girl who seldom raised her hand in class, depicting what appeared to be rituals in her drawings? Within a half-mile radius, investigators hunt, but the dense terrain slows them down. Outside, they find nothing except stillness and the weight of an unexplained presence. No footprints, no remnants. The case has been revived for potential use as a crime scene and as a recovery site. The disclosure of the drawings to the press raises suspicions of foul play, and a new notion, considerably darker than anything anyone had previously contemplated, starts circulating. Where did the members of the 1999 graduating class go in those woods? If anybody had intended for them to never come back, who was it? Numerous news crews, investigators, and worried people descended upon the police station and band in the days following the school bus's discovery in the Oregon forests. An air of mystery pervaded the whole state. The 1999 graduating class, what had become of them? The rusting school bus had bones. What did they signify? Why, after over 20 years, has nothing come to light until this moment? Afterwards, an unassuming individual entered the Bend police station on the morning of June 10th. As the door swung open and a man stepped inside, the customary monotony of the station's fluorescent lights hummed, and the early morning haze lingered in the air. He appeared frail due to his extreme leanness and extreme thinness. Unshaven cheeks, disheveled clothing, and a frayed jacket bedraggled his bony figure. His pale, weary eyes darted anxiously from one corner of the room to the other, and his long, unruly hair stuck to his face as though he hadn't brushed it in years. When they noticed him, the cops stopped talking about the bus they had just found. The man appeared oblivious to the abrupt change in the atmosphere. His stride was deliberate as he leaned forward toward the front desk. A scarcely audible murmur escaped his lips as he introduced himself. "I'm Jared Field from the class of 1999. No one budged for an instant. With 22 years of mysteries hanging in the balance, the words lingered. As if anticipating a comedic moment, the officers locked perplexed looks, but nothing came out. This is too unbelievable to be true. Is it? Jared Field's name had been forgotten since. While on their graduation trip, he and the other members of his class went missing. There was no sign of anybody ever being located. Sergeant Emily Wells was one of the cops who cautiously advanced. A request was made of Mr. Field to obtain his identification, but Jared remained silent. Instead, he nervously glanced about the room, as if someone were watching him the whole time. "I was never meant to return," he whispered, his voice quivering. "They're still watching." Sergeant Wells felt a sense of unease wash over him. With an air of mistrust in her voice, she inquired, "Who's watching, Mr. Fields?" The ideas stuck to Jared like a heavy cloud, and he shook his head as if attempting to shake them off. It sounded less like a guy who had survived something terrible and more like someone who had been compelled to survive, like someone who had been marked by something dark and unnatural when he said, I don't know. I was never supposed to come back." None of us were. Sergeant Wells' tolerance was starting to crack. An explanation was necessary for her. Responses were required for each of them. "Mr. Fields, we need you to tell us where you've been all these years. We need to know what happened to your friends." To the other students, Jared's eyes began to flicker. As though he were afraid someone was listening, he cast a glance toward the door. "I can't. Not yet. Not until I—" He paused, deeply swallowing as if the words were a poison in his throat. A forensics expert, however, arrived with a report before anybody dared to inquire further. Sergeant Wells was given it by the officer. Her brow furrowed in astonishment as she read it hastily. "Jared Fields, Your fingerprints match. Your DNA? It's a match. Jared glanced up, his shocked expression befitting a guy who had just received the death penalty. I informed you, he murmured. As they looked on in disbelief, the cops tried to decipher his words. I told you I was never supposed to come back. I shouldn't have come back. They were hoping that a man would come forward and provide them with answers about the disappearance, the school bus, and the bones. But what they had was a man whose very existence added to the air of intrigue. Someone who seemed more like a riddle than anything else. Mr. Fields, what do you mean by you shouldn't have come back? Sergeant Wells asked, her voice calm but confident. As Jared's expression twisted into dread, questions such, where were you for all these years? Where did you go? What happened to your classmates? Flooded his mind. He took a few steps back from the desk, as if he were attempting to put some distance between himself and the question and everything else. There was a chilling, unsettling stillness as the speaker said, I can't say. Not yet. They're still out there. They won't stop watching until it's all over, uncertain of what to do next. The officers exchanged glances. The man who they believed could finally put their problems to rest and reveal the truth was suddenly shaking with terror. Jared Fields turned and strode for the door with the same rapidity with which he had entered. I'm unable to remain in this place, he declared. If I remain here, they will find me, he said, prompting Sergeant Wells to hurry over and detain him. We refer to it as cleansing. The term lingered there as a cautionary tale. Something deeper than simple memory danced in Jared's eyes, like dread. They gave us food, said the doctor, but it didn't taste right. It was off like they were drugging us, dulling us. Some of us started getting these vivid dreams, nightmares that felt too real, too intense. And then they started making us sleep in shifts, very controlled, very specific. They wanted to know when we were awake and when we were asleep. It didn't matter if you were tired. You had to follow the schedule. Evidently worn out by the memory, he massaged his eyes. Some of the kids started to resist. They couldn't take it. They wanted to leave, but they were too afraid. They were terrified of what would happen if they didn't comply. I saw a few of them try to escape. I heard their screams when they were dragged into the woods. They were never seen again. There was an eerie stillness as the words lingered in the air, creating an atmosphere of absolute silence. Once again, Jared spoke, but this time his voice was much lower and his lips quivered. They told us they were the chosen ones. The world had ended outside those woods. The only thing left was their commune. They said we were chosen to live in a new world, to be a part of something greater. But it wasn't a choice. It was a prison, and those who didn't accept it, he struggled to swallow, his throat dry. They were sacrificed. A chilling, faraway terror flitted across Jared's gaze. I wasn't the only one who saw it. Those who tried to leave, the ones who fought back, they were offered up to the forest. No one ever came back. As they listened intently, the investigators remained seated. According to Jared, by 2006, I'd had enough. I found a way to escape. I ran as far and as fast as I could. But even then, I was too afraid to tell anyone. I kept quiet. I stayed hidden. I thought maybe, just maybe if I kept quiet, they'd forget about me, that I could live my life. Jared lowered his words to a whisper as his eyes grew darker. I thought I was the only one. But when I heard the bus had been found, I knew they hadn't forgotten. I had to tell someone. I had to tell you all the truth. Once again, the room went silent as the impact of Jared's remarks weighed heavily on all those in attendance. Astonishment swept over the investigators. The events he had just detailed were more than just a missing person. They included a cult, a conspiracy, and the deaths of 27 youths. Lives that had been reshaped, managed, and given up to a force far more sinister than anybody had dared to dream. It was never intended for Jared's classmates to escape, unlike him. Someone had a reason for selecting them. The last terrible truth was held by the forest, the same woodland that had concealed their remains for decades. The world they had been warned about was not lost, but rather patiently awaited the arrival of the next generation. There was a range of emotions when Jared initially came forward. Concerned parents who were seeking answers and a sense of closure listened to his every word. Their faith was in him. There was a logic to his account that the authorities might understand. Ritties has no idea what to say. However, not everyone believed him. This was particularly true for the families of the pupils who went missing. The bleak picture Jared presented of their children was incompatible with their perception of them. Their perspective was that he was merely a survivor, a guy whose psyche had been distorted by the atrocities he had faced. Discord in the neighborhood intensified. Some families publicly blamed Jared for their children's deaths in the months after his return, while others saw him as a victim himself. From every angle, his credibility was called into doubt. The media gushed over him, calling him a hero or a psychopath. The determination of Jared, nevertheless, was unwavering. Unbeknownst to everybody else, the truth was even more horrifying to him. Protective custody of Jared was soon imposed. The police were afraid that individuals who still held the belief that their children might be somewhere out there would try to silence him. Nobody could be trusted, they thought. Too many questions remained unsolved, and too many threads were left hanging. No single story satisfactorily explained the role of the militia, the mysterious goings-on in the forest, or the whereabouts of the missing kids. To be sure, Jared's account was unsettling, but at least it gave us a peek of the truth. Months after his eerie trek through the forest core, Jared wrote a memoir about his experiences. New hypotheses regarding the 99 class, the militia, and the bizarre events that transpired in the woods were sparked by the book's meteoric rise to fame. Others wrote it off as the babblings of a broken man, while some took his word for it. However, Jared had seen something, and that much was evident. Something incomprehensible to humans. Something that would remain a mystery to all. A chasm sprang up in the town as a result of the 1999 graduating class's disappearance. Someone courageous enough to go beneath the moss and vines would find the answers to the mysteries that the forest still contained. As the last chilling chapter in the tale of the students who mysteriously disappeared, Jared's book came to represent both reality and insanity. Tragically, the families of the missing had to pick up the pieces of their lives that had been broken. Because they were so sure their children were somewhere out there, some parents persisted in looking for them. Others, like Jared's longtime supporters, could only face the somber reality that their loved ones had perished in the forest and would never return. The reality, however, was much more sinister than everyone had anticipated. The hype around the 1999 graduating class had persisted even after Jared's memoir came out. For many families, the story represented a choice between optimism and despair, and its weight lingered in the neighborhood. While some thought Jared had made it all up, others thought he had only touched on a much darker subject. Jared retreated into himself, coming out only for interviews or meetings with the authorities. However, when we consider he returned to Forest Grove High School on a chilly, cloudy afternoon, a site that had previously been buzzing with excitement for the upcoming summer of 1999 and all the wonderful memories formed there. It had transformed into a monument, a lifeless symbol of what had been squandered. He was the only one present at the memorial honoring his fellow students. The polished stone slabs bore the names of each kid who had vanished. In the dim light, the plaques shimmered, representing the town's demise. A moldy, fading yearbook was pulled from Jared's jacket as he crouched down. Carefully, he opened it. The pages had yellowed with age. In the rear, you could see a note that could have been penned by him alone. He carefully inserted it into the yearbook, concealing it beneath the cover so no one would find it unless they examined it closely. According to the note, "We tried to leave. Only I made it. I am sorry." Jared stood there for what seemed like an eternity staring at the memorial, the weight of his sorrow and shame crushing him like the trees. He could see his friends' faces, hear their laughing, and sense the terrible last days of their voyage, as well as the memories of the lost. Still holding the yearbook and its eerie warning for anyone courageous enough to pursue the truth, he silently turned and departed. Critics contend that Jared concocted an elaborate tale to justify the recurring nightmares he suffered from. Some think the events in the forest were even worse than he had indicated, and that the truth was even more sinister. There is, however, no denying that the events of 1999 continue to linger in the Oregon woods. Do you trust Jared's account? Or is something more sinister still concealed in the forest? Leave your thoughts in the comment section. For more incredible true mysteries, subscribe, hit the like button, and enable bell alerts.